The grand hall sparkled with chandeliers, its marble floors echoing with laughter and the chatter of prestige. Professors and students in sharp suits circled around a chalkboard where an equation stretched across in dizzying symbols. It was the centerpiece of the evening's challenge, an unsolved puzzle that no one had cracked. Professor Aldrich, proud and smug, raised his voice for all to hear. "Solve this equation and the prize is yours." He waved his hand at the problem, inviting only the brave, or the foolish, to try. That's when the laughter shifted. Because stepping forward wasn't a polished student or an ambitious academic. It was Ethan Ward, the homeless man who had been lingering outside, invited in only as a cruel joke. His coat was torn, his shoes falling apart, his hair unkempt. To the elite in the room, he was invisible, until now. Snickers filled the air. "He doesn't even know how to hold the chalk," someone whispered. Aldrich smirked, certain the spectacle would end in humiliation. But Ethan's hands didn't shake. His eyes locked on the equation, and for the first time that night, the room began to quiet. Because what no one realized was this: the man they mocked was about to solve the impossible, and shock them all. The atmosphere inside the university's grand hall was thick with arrogance. Crystal glasses clinked as champagne flowed, and the air buzzed with conversations about research grants, future publications, and lofty ambitions. In the center, beneath the glittering chandeliers, stood the chalkboard covered with the infamous equation, an unsolved problem that had drawn some of the brightest young minds to this gala. Professor Aldrich, with his polished shoes and tailored suit, relished the moment. He thrived on spectacle, and tonight's challenge was crafted for one purpose: to showcase his superiority. "This," he declared, tapping the chalkboard with his gold pen, "has humbled graduate students, confounded visiting scholars, and resisted every attempt at solution. But perhaps tonight, among this gathering of prodigies, someone will succeed." The crowd leaned in, eager to witness the humiliation of anyone who dared try. A few students whispered bets, their laughter thin and cruel. That's when Ethan Ward was ushered inside. Some students had spotted him lingering near the entrance earlier, wrapped in his tattered coat, quietly warming his hands by the building's exhaust vents. Someone, perhaps out of mockery, perhaps curiosity, had invited him in. Now, standing at the edge of the hall, Ethan looked wildly out of place. His shoes were scuffed and split, his beard overgrown, his face withered by years of hardship. He clutched the strap of a fraying backpack, the only possession he carried with him everywhere. Whispers erupted. "What's he doing here? This isn't a soup kitchen." He probably wandered in looking for food. A ripple of laughter spread, growing louder as eyes turned toward Aldrich. The professor smirked, seizing the opportunity. "Ah," he said, voice booming. "Even the streets send their champions to try their luck. Tell me, sir, do you think you can solve what has baffled the brightest?" The crowd erupted again, some chuckling, others shaking their heads in disbelief. Ethan's cheeks flushed, but he didn't retreat. His gaze flicked to the chalkboard, then back to the professor. "May I?" His voice was soft, but steady. "By all means," Aldrich replied, sweeping an arm toward the chalkboard. "Show us the extent of your education." His words dripped with derision, each syllable sharpened to cut. Ethan walked forward, each step echoing against the marble floor. The room seemed to hold its breath, but not from respect, rather, from the thrill of anticipated failure. A student whispered, "He probably doesn't even know what those symbols mean." Another added, "This will be over in seconds." The chalk felt cool in Ethan's hand as he picked it up. For a moment, he simply stared at the board. To the crowd, it looked like hesitation. They laughed louder. But inside his mind, long silent gears began to turn. Memories of textbooks, of late nights at the library decades ago, of professors who once praised his brilliance, they all flickered back to life. Aldrich leaned closer to his colleagues. "Watch this. He'll make a fool of himself before the first line." Ethan touched the board, hesitated just long enough for the crowd to erupt again, and then he began to write. At first, the marks were simple, almost hesitant. Gasps turned into giggles. "He's guessing," someone said. "He's doodling," another laughed. But then his movements quickened. His strokes sharpened, confident. Symbols connected into sequences, sequences into patterns, and patterns into structures that only the truly trained could recognize. The laughter faltered. A few students furrowed their brows. A professor at the back adjusted his glasses. The room's noise dulled to an uneasy murmur. Aldrich, sensing the shift, tried to regain control. "Well, anyone can copy symbols. Let's not mistake scribbling for genius." His voice was loud, but strained. Ethan ignored him. His focus narrowed to the board, the world around him fading. His hands moved faster now, chalk dust clinging to his fingers, his body angled as if every fiber of him was pouring into the solution. And then, as his hand hovered midair, Ethan paused. He turned, his eyes scanning the room, meeting the mocking gazes of the students and professors. "You wanted to see me fail," he said quietly. "But what if you're about to see the opposite?" The silence that followed was suffocating. Aldrich's smirk wavered. The crowd leaned in, torn between disbelief and the dawning realization that something extraordinary was unfolding. The challenge had been laid, and Ethan Ward, the man they mocked, was about to change everything. Did you feel that shift? One moment the room was laughing, the next it was silent, holding its breath as Ethan's chalk flew across the board. That's the kind of moment we live for, the underdog turning the impossible into the unforgettable. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, don't just watch, be part of it. Hit that subscribe button right now and join our community. Because here, every click helps us bring more tales of unexpected brilliance to life. The silence in the grand hall was unlike anything it had ever known. No clinking glasses, no polished laughter, no smug remarks. Just the steady scratch of chalk against slate as Ethan Ward's hand danced across the equation that had baffled even the most celebrated mathematicians in attendance. Every line he drew carried with it an unshakable confidence. His coat might have been torn, his shoes worn to threads, but his mind was precise, sharp, and relentless. The fragmented whispers of mockery that had filled the room only minutes before now shifted into stunned murmurs. "Wait, he's structuring it differently," a young doctoral student whispered, craning forward. His notebook slipped from his hands unnoticed. Professor Aldrich's jaw clenched. He refused to believe it. "Nonsense," he spat under his breath. "He'll collapse in the next step. He's bluffing." But Ethan didn't collapse. His movements grew faster, surer. The chalkboard filled with cascading formulas, each one unlocking the next, each symbol flowing seamlessly into patterns that were both elegant and undeniable. He paused once, running his chalk-dusted fingers through his messy hair, then continued with renewed vigor. It wasn't just problem-solving, it was artistry. By now, the room was leaning forward. Students forgot their drinks. Professors forgot their pride. Even the waitstaff stood frozen at the edges, trays suspended midair. All eyes were fixed on the homeless man they had mocked minutes ago. Aldrich tried again, louder this time, desperate to hold control. "Mathematics isn't a parlor trick. He's only mimicking old theories. Any of you could do the same if you'd wasted years scribbling in isolation." But his voice cracked, and the crowd barely heard him. Because what they were seeing wasn't mimicry. It was mastery. Finally, Ethan stopped. He stood back from the board, chest rising and falling with quiet exhaustion. The chalk slipped from his fingers and clattered to the floor. For a long moment, nobody breathed. The solution stretched across the blackboard, a web of logic and elegance that resolved into a conclusion as clean as sunlight. The first sound was a gasp, from an elderly professor at the back. He pushed through the crowd, his glasses trembling in his hand as he peered at the board. "Impossible," he muttered. His fingers traced the air along Ethan's work. "Not just correct, it's beautifully correct." The crowd stirred, their disbelief colliding with awe. Students glanced at each other, wide-eyed. Professors whispered frantically, their arrogance unraveling. Then, a voice cut through the noise. Dr. Helena Strauss, a renowned mathematician whose name alone commanded international respect, stepped forward. Her eyes shone with something between reverence and astonishment. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice steady and clear, "this is not imitation. This is a breakthrough." Gasps rippled through the hall. Dr. Strauss turned to Ethan, her expression softening. How long have you been carrying this knowledge?" Ethan met her gaze. For the first time, he looked almost shy, as though the weight of so many stares pressed against him. "Long enough," he murmured. But no one was listening. The words hung in the air, slicing deeper than any chalk line ever could. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. The truth was undeniable. They had laughed at him, dismissed him, mocked him, not because he lacked brilliance, but because he lacked status. Suddenly, applause erupted. It started tentatively, from one student near the front. Then another joined. Then another. Within seconds, the hall thundered with claps, cheers, even shouts. The same voices that had mocked now roared with admiration. Aldrich stood frozen, his face pale. His eyes darted from the solution on the board to the roaring crowd. He opened his mouth, but no words came. His authority, his superiority, it had shattered in an instant. Dr. Strauss raised her hand for silence, and the applause dimmed. "I propose," she said firmly, "that this solution be documented, reviewed, and recognized. And that Mr. Ethan Ward be given the respect his brilliance demands." The crowd erupted again, this time with unanimous agreement. Students rushed forward, eager to shake Ethan's hand. Professors who once ignored him now tripped over themselves to offer praise. Even the servers, eyes wide with admiration, nodded toward him with respect. Through it all, Ethan remained still, almost overwhelmed. His shoulders, once slumped with the weight of invisibility, now stood taller. But his humility remained intact. He didn't bask in the adoration, he merely nodded, softly thanking those around him. And then, almost as if fate demanded it, Aldrich tried one final time. He pushed forward, his voice sharp with desperation. "This is absurd. He's a drifter, a man with no credentials, no degrees, no recognition. You cannot just crown him a genius because he scribbled some lines on a board." The hall fell silent again. All eyes turned to Ethan, waiting for his response. Ethan looked at Aldrich calmly. "You asked if I could solve it. I did. The board doesn't lie. The math doesn't care about degrees or titles. Truth is truth, no matter who holds the chalk." The words struck like lightning. The crowd erupted once more, this time louder, stronger, united. Aldrich stumbled back, his authority stripped bare, his arrogance rendered meaningless. Ethan, the man they had dismissed as nothing, had become undeniable. His brilliance wasn't just seen, it was celebrated. And in that moment, he wasn't homeless, or forgotten, or invisible. He was extraordinary. The thunder of applause reverberated through the grand hall. What had once been a cage of mockery was now an arena of triumph. Ethan Ward stood there, not with the posture of a conqueror, but with the quiet dignity of someone who had nothing to prove, and yet had proved everything. The students surged toward him first. "That was incredible," one said, her eyes shining with admiration. Another offered his notebook, asking for an autograph as though Ethan were already a legend. The professors followed, awkward in their sudden humility, extending hands that moments ago would not have lifted to help him off the street. Their pride bent under the undeniable truth scrawled across the chalkboard. The murmurs of respect grew into declarations. "A breakthrough. A genius hidden in plain sight. We must publish this immediately." For the first time in years, Ethan felt the weight of invisibility lift from his shoulders. But he didn't bask in the attention. He simply nodded, thanked them, and stepped back, as though the board, and not he, deserved the applause. Justice, however, had its own way of balancing the scales. Professor Aldrich, red-faced and trembling, tried to reclaim control. This circus is absurd. You cannot let a vagrant waltz in here and outshine decades of scholarly work." His voice cracked, but no one cheered with him this time. Instead, they looked at him with thinly veiled disdain. Whispers turned sharp, arrogant fraud. He never solved it himself. All this time, it was ego, not brilliance. Dr. Helena Strauss's voice cut through, cool and unyielding. Professor Aldrich, it appears the only absurdity here is your pride. The man you ridiculed has done what you could not. That is the only truth that matters tonight. The blow landed harder than any insult. Aldrich stumbled back, the aura of superiority that had carried him for years collapsing in the face of undeniable proof. Invitations to speak, research collaborations, even the admiration of his peers, all of it began to slip away, as quickly as the crowd's opinion shifted. His downfall wasn't loud or theatrical. It was quiet, inevitable, and irreversible. Meanwhile, Ethan slipped out from the crowd's center. He didn't crave the spotlight, he never had. Outside the marble hall, the night air was cool against his face. The stars overhead seemed clearer than they had in years. For once, he felt seen, not by the glittering elite, but by the truth of his own worth. A student caught up with him at the steps. "Mr. Ward, where will you go? Surely you'll take a position, or at least let them honor you." Ethan smiled faintly, adjusting the strap of his worn backpack. "Maybe," he said softly. "But not tonight. Tonight, I just want to walk. To breathe." He left the university behind, not as the invisible man they had mocked, but as someone who had reminded them all that brilliance has no uniform, no mansion, no title. His value was never in their approval, it was in the truth he carried within him. Back inside, the hall still buzzed. But outside, under the vast sky, Ethan Ward walked freely, quietly victorious. Not because the world finally noticed him, but because he no longer needed it to. And that's the power of truth, it shines no matter where it's found. Tonight, a man everyone dismissed as nothing reminded the world that brilliance can come from anywhere, and that pride is always humbled by truth. If Ethan's story moved you, if it made you cheer for the underdog, then don't keep it to yourself. Share your thoughts in the comments, because your voice matters here. And if you want to be part of a community that celebrates stories like this, where the overlooked become unforgettable, hit that follow button right now. More tales of resilience, justice, and triumph are on the way, and you won't want to miss them.